Hello everyone, my name is Ryan and welcome back to another video about art. So today we're going to be continuing the first episode into the volume 2 of Drawing Human Anatomy and Proportion. Now, similar to the last video, I'd like to say as a quick disclaimer that I'm not a professional nor an expert on art, but I'm merely just a person who likes art and is pretty good at drawing art and takes art classes and is pretty much everything but a professional at art. And if you don't understand anything in this video, you can go back to the other video, check that out, the link will be in the description, and yeah. Finally, I'd like to note that the audio recording for this part was actually recorded on a separate day compared to the first part. So due to that, the audio does sound a little weird, and I do apologize for that. Although I have tried my best to fix it, I do apologize that the audio is a little bit weird sounding, but I hope it's not going to be a big deal. Anyways, enjoy. So let's say you have a decent knowledge of anatomy and you want to draw some people, but you don't really want to draw them super duper detailed like what I've described before with all the muscular and skeletal systems being 100% accurate. And although anatomy is very important to consider, sometimes you don't have to be that detailed, that specific, especially if you're just trying to draw like a rough sketch of a person that doesn't really have to be super duper anatomical. Or if you're drawing a sketch of a person that doesn't have really huge muscles that need to be well defined, but merely is someone who is of average shape and size and proportion. So there are three different strategies and methods of drawing people. Now, silhouetting, or drawing a silhouette, is basically drawing, so to speak, a cutout of the person or thing you're going to draw. Now, because you're only drawing what is in essence a shadow of the person you're trying to draw, you're not going to have a lot of space to go for detail, since what you're going to draw is pretty much just going to be a big black shape. However, silhouetting can be a very good starting point when you're drawing people, mainly to get the basic shape and the basic, features that you want to include in your drawing. Not to mention that since you're just drawing with a black color, you don't really have to pay attention to any of these details, and you can worry about them later when you draw a better copy of said person. So although drawing a silhouette is relatively simple, it is of course not the best method to use and is only really just a basic method to start off with. It's also better suited for more dynamic postures and more complex positions and whatnot with a lot more details or like background objects or other features of the drawing, instead of say a normal person standing straight wearing completely normal clothes. Silhouetting is also a good strategy when it comes to just building off of what you've already drawn. Instead of erasing and removing things that don't quite fit, you're mainly just adding and stacking onto the layers and layers of color that you're adding onto your silhouette. Of course, when I say color, I mainly just mean black and whatever pencil, your marker, or whatever you're using. Of course, that being said, you don't really have to go for black. I mean, you could technically go for any color, but basically what you want to do with silhouetting is just get a basic shape or design of what you're trying to draw, the person or thing you're trying to draw, and just kind of just block it in without too much consideration to the actual proportions or figure, and more of just drawing the actual person. Now, it's pretty hard to do. In my opinion, I'm not the best at drawing these things, but yeah. Now, as I mentioned before, when you're drawing silhouettes, you don't really have to be very detailed, but if you want to just get like a general image or like a general shape or a very simple, basic, general place to start off with when you're drawing someone, then usually it's a very fun, simple, and easy method to use. Of course, that being said, this drawing still needs a lot of improvement if it's going to be anything decent, but you know what I mean. Now, the second method is a bit similar but kind of different to silhouetting, which is gesture drawing. Now, the other form of drawing is contour drawing, which is pretty much goes hand in hand with gesture drawing, but usually gesture drawing comes first, and then contour drawing, which I'll explain what that is later. So gesture drawing is basically, instead of drawing hyper-realistic or really detailed drawings, you're basically just generalizing whatever you're drawing into basic shapes and lines and forms. Now, when it comes to drawing people, these shapes are most commonly going to be rectangles, spheres, circles, ovals, or depending on how detailed you want to be. Gesture drawing is by far probably the most common method that most artists use when it comes to determining proportion and shape, because it's probably one of the most reliable and one of the other second easiest things to do. It's a lot more detailed than silhouette drawing, but it's not that harder detailed than, say, contour drawing. So when I said that gesture drawing is what most artists like to start off with, it's basically, well, as I mentioned before, very simple geometric shapes that deconstruct the object you're trying to draw. They're a lot less detailed than, say, contour drawing, and a bit more detailed than silhouette drawing, and most of the time it involves shapes that define the structure of whatever you're drawing. Now, contour drawing, as I said before, kind of goes off of gesture drawing, is basically a lot more not hyper-detailed, but a lot more detailed drawing or version of whatever you're drawing. While gesture outlines the structure and shape of a form or person, contour focuses on the details and, well, basically everything else that makes a person. Now, contour drawing is usually a very vague term, but it usually refers to drawing the details and basically making your lines actually represent different, let's say, body or facial features. It's a lot harder to say than to actually do, but basically imagine contour drawing as some people would say, actual drawing. Now, regarding the fact that I'm not very good at drawing people and to avoid any proportional issues, we're just going to do the same thing we did with the measurements and basically draw on another person, just to show you how you would technically draw them if you were to use gesture drawing. Now, most of the time, 99% of the time, the skull will be defined by a very large circular sphere. And I'm going to try to draw this the best I can. Now, technically, anatomy speaking, the size of the sphere would be cut off because, as we all know, the skull isn't a perfect circle. So it looks something like this. After that, you would add the chin, and you would connect these lines depending on what the person's face is, but you would get a skull that generally looks like this. If you want, you could draw the eye line, which would go around here, and you could draw the middle of the face, which goes like so. After that, you can, I guess, erase the sides if you really want to, and you're left with a skull that sort of, kind of, not really looks like this. Most of the time, I do like to round it out a little, just because it always looks kind of weird when you just cut it off, something like that. So, in general, your skull looks like a circle combined with a couple lines, like so. Just to clarify, this crossover here I made near the eyes and the center of the face is basically to represent the directionality of the face and the head and where it's pointing. It's just a very clever or very simple reference to indicate the direction of the face so it doesn't, complicate anything in the future. Now, the neck should technically go to the sides of the face. Now, I'm going to say this reference does have a pretty thick neck, so I'm just going to draw it a little less thin because normally necks should look like this. For the torso, you have two choices, really. I've seen these two as the most common methods. You can either do what I would call a squashed cylinder, which is basically something that looks like this, to demonstrate the rib cage, or you could draw a trapezoidal prism, which is the best I can define that. Again, showing you how to draw it would be a lot easier than drawing it explaining how to draw it. Now, depending on your drawing style, this trapezoidal body region could go all the way as far down as probably all the way here, depending on what your drawing style is or how you like to draw people. But basically, this prism just symbolizes the general overall body portion of the person. Next, you're going to have to connect it with another trapezoidal prism, probably bending the other direction, connected to basically where the waist and the legs would be. Now, after that, you're going to have to draw the legs, which are basically going to be cylindrical-ish, cone-shaped things, which would kind of look like this if you drew them three-dimensionally. Do notice how they connect with the torso, and also looking at this, I do realize I've made a very small, weird error, but basically they connect with the torso somewhat like this, that you could imagine there would be basically a ball joint or something like that, basically. I'm saying basically a lot. It's really hard to explain. It's not super basic, and also I'm not good at drawing this. So, yeah, just bear with me. Now, for the knees, they're usually represented by simply a circle or a sphere. Again, think of it like a ball joint for, like, I don't know, one of those, like, toy dolls or whatever you play with, toy action figures. Think of it like a ball joint connecting the two legs together. Once again, for the other part legs, you have to draw another cylindrical-ish object. And same for the other leg over here. Now, the feet are sort of interesting. I would just say draw a ball or a circle for the heel, and then sort of just base your foot off of that, because there's not really much you can go wrong if you just start off with that. And of course, perspective-wise, if the foot's facing forward, it's going to look like this, because that's just how it works. Looking at the shoulders, the arms are usually connected once again with another ball or sphere. Now, depending on how large these are, usually dictates how wide or how thick your shoulders or arms would be. So once again, similar to the legs, you have to be drawing some interestingly cylindrical shapes. Now, remember that whenever you're drawing arms, or in this case, the lower legs as well, you want to make sure that your cylinders, they don't look like solid cylinders like this, but they look more like cylinders that have a bit more curve to them. Now, when I say a little bit more curve to them, I mean, for example, if you look at the arms, they're not going to be perfect. They're not perfect cylinders. So what you have to do is that you kind of have to funnel them downwards, sort of like a bit of a cone, in order to get that sort of shape you need. So although this is exaggerated, this is generally what you're going to have to do when you're drawing these sort of gesture figures. The other arm, although kind of blocked by the body, should go around here, sort of. Technically, the cylinder would end over here. There'd be a circle over here, and we continue off with the other arm, which is hidden over here. And for the hands, usually they're pretty simple. Just draw like a rectangle or something like that to generally symbolize their shape. Now, once again, I will say that everyone has their own different way of drawing these things, so if your strategy or whatever doesn't necessarily match this, it's totally fine, and to be honest, this isn't really very good anyways. Another quick thing you want to note when you're drawing these sort of gesture drawings is that be careful, especially when your model has very baggy or large clothing. Now, clothing is always a big problem when it comes to drawing gesture, because with the clothing on, it's hard to tell where the actual, let's say, arms and legs are, where the actual appendages and limbs are. For example, if a woman's wearing a really big dress, it's going to be hard to see where the legs are, and thus it's going to be a little hard to judge where the legs will be and how to draw them. So usually when you're drawing professionally, it's good to find models and images of people that aren't nude per se, but are wearing less baggy clothes. Like this image over here is a pretty good example. The jeans are relatively tight and the shirt is a short sleeve, which is generally fits them well, I guess. So the larger and more baggier the clothes are, the chances are you're going to have a little bit more problem when it comes to finding the gesture and when it comes to finding the actual structure of the person. Now, this isn't the only method of actually drawing gesture. There are actually multiple other ways and different styles that people use, and I'm going to demonstrate a few of them right now. Alternatively, many people draw the torso as the rib cage, which is usually symbolized by a very cylindrical cylinder. Well, not super cylindrical, I mean, it's kind of, as I mentioned before, it's kind of like a squished cylinder. Now, with a basic understanding of anatomy, you'll know that the rib cage sort of looks generally like this. And yes, this is a very bad looking rib cage, but generally, you know what I mean, the ribs go here and here. Now, if you don't want to draw the actual lines that go with the rib cage, that's totally fine. Just leave it as a cylinder and you should be pretty good to go. Another thing that's actually pretty important to mention is that with the other contour drawing, I should have included it, but you also might want to include a spine. Now, a spine is very important for people and animals and stuff, but a spine is very important when it comes to actually drawing the general position of the person you're drawing. Now, the main spine positions, so to speak, are an S and a C curve. So usually when someone is crouched down, or let's say curved or bent in some sort of direction, their body will make a natural C position, where their head will be here, their legs will be here, and their arms will be doing whatever. Now, for other people, the most common position is the S spine position. Now, the S position is most commonly found in people who are standing up, and another place you might have seen it is if you ever looked at one of those, like, I don't know, charts about, like, good posture or whatnot. Basically, the S position goes from your neck and kind of follows your back in a curve. Now, if the person you're drawing is standing completely straight like this, you may start to think that, oh, I know, it's like an I position or something. But usually in the human body, it's extremely rare for a spine to be completely straight, because that's not how spines work. But for now, since this person is in fact standing very straight, their spine would in fact be pretty straight. Of course, the spine can also somewhat dictate the center of gravity, and as you can notice over here, the center of gravity is slightly shifted to this way, so I'd say the spine is relatively straight, but also kind of curved this way, I would guess. So it looks something like this. Now, with the spine, that means the waist or the general lower body area would go somewhere here, and from what I've seen, usually this is in fact, yes, drawn as a trapezoidal prism. If you want to be three-dimensional, you can do that, but you don't really have to. Now, we have the spine and the bottom area. The arms pretty much go the exact same way. We have circles connected to cylinders and whatnot. And there you have another way of drawing people. Now, the final method that I've seen happen or being used most commonly is the oversimplify everything sort of strategy. Now, to start off with this, you need three basic lines. You need the spine position, which we've settled already, which kind of looks like a very somewhat curved S. The next thing you need is the shoulder line. So that's basically a line created from one end of the shoulder to the other end of the shoulder, which doesn't have to be straight or whatever, but generally is shown like that. The next line you need is the waistline, which is once again the direction of the waist, which in this diagram looks relatively straight, but is also kind of curved that way. After that, you just got to draw circles for where the elbows or shoulders and elbows would be, draw lines to connect them, and draw lines to where the hands would be. And for the head, just draw a circle combined with, let's say, trapezoid. Now, the problem with this method is that although I have seen some people use this in certain cases, it's most of the time very undetailed and not really super helpful when it comes to drawing anatomy. But if I were you, I'd stick with either method 1 or method 2 of drawing, just because they're a lot more detailed and a lot easier to render. Now, going back to something I said before, the third method of drawing people is in fact contour drawing. And when I say contour drawing, I mean drawing very specific lines and very specific details. Now, the extent of how detailed you are is pretty much up to you, but generally contour drawing usually goes after gesture drawing because gesture sort of starts off the structure while contour sort of finishes it off, if you know what I mean. But it is possible to do contour drawing without focusing on the gesture part. Contour drawing is more drawing what you see compared to gesture drawing, which is drawing what you know. So I'll just start off with this. This is just going to be simply me tracing over this image, but technically if you were to actually draw this, you'd be, I guess, eyeballing it off a model. Now, I did say before that contour drawing is really as detailed as you want it to be. You could be really, really rough with some lines like I'm doing right now, or it could be really, really thorough and really smoothing out the lines you want to draw. Just a quick tip, I wouldn't go for the smoothing out the lines method, mainly because it's slow and kind of painstaking if you want to get everything correct. It's a lot easier to just draw and connect a bunch of little small lines than trying to do it in one big long line. Now, that's not to say that you can perhaps use some curves and whatnot. I mean, it's totally fine and up to you if you want to use some curves and stuff. Just go with what you see and don't bother with getting all the details perfect, since you'll have plenty of time to get the details perfect when you're done, well, when you have the basics done. So again, contour drawing, not really focused on the whole anatomy, more of just focusing on drawing what the heck you see. And if you want, I guess you could possibly add a few anatomical notes in there if you want. So to mark out the shoulders, mark out the hands, or stuff like that. Again, detail is all the way up to you. For example, these jeans have a lot of curves in them. You can draw all like the wrinkles and the curves and whatnot, or you could just stick with what you see and basically just draw the legs as simple as they could possibly be. Now, another thing when it comes to contour drawing is speed. Now, if you had all the time in the world, you could probably do a pretty good contour drawing. However, if you're kind of rushed or you just don't have that much time, you could do something a lot more simpler. Now, as you can see when you're drawing contour images, it's very detailed. It looks pretty good, to be honest. It looks a lot more realistic, you could say, but it doesn't really have that much structural form to it. Now, when you combine contour drawing with gesture drawing, you can come up with something that's a little bit more anatomical when you combine them both together. One looks good, but when you put them together, it looks pretty good as well. Now, of course, most of the time when artists are doing their finishing renderings or their final renderings, they're not going to want to include all this messy stuff in the background. So what they'll usually do is that either they'll erase it when they're done with it, or they'll just turn it down if they want to keep a sort of sketchbook kind of feel to it. So you can still kind of see the gesture drawing to it, but you can also see the details of the contour. So it's kind of a mix of both. Another quick tip when drawing things in general is that you really gotta keep referencing different parts of the body to other parts of the body. Remember earlier in the video when I mentioned the head to height ratio thing? Well, whenever you're drawing anything, nonetheless, you always want to keep comparing it to other parts of what you're drawing. Not only can you use the head height ratio, but you can also compare different angles. For example, you can notice that the arms go in this sort of angle. You can notice that going straight down, the head is aligned with this leg over here. You can tell that these 2 feet are relatively level. However, you also notice that this leg is off balance and off to the left of the drawing. You notice that the hip goes in this direction, which is completely the opposite direction of the arms. You can notice the shoulders are relatively flat. You'll notice that the feet don't extend farther than the shoulder over here, and you know that the elbow over here extends to just about the length of the foot. If you really want to be detailed, you can consider the angle from the top of the head to the elbow, and use that when you're referencing your drawing. So in a way, if you can locate all of the different pinpoint areas and all of the different comparisons, your drawing will be a lot more realistic compared to what you're actually drawing, as long as all these comparisons and ratios, I guess, make sense. It's just another strategy you can use to make sure that what you're drawing is in fact realistic, or it matches to the thing you're drawing or the reference you're drawing of.